So, of course, for this week's reflective review, I was requested something that's another one of the greats. Now, there's two things I need to get out into the open right now. First, I do not consider Suikoden 2 among my top 10. Maybe. I'd have to think about it. It's definitely up there. It's definitely up there amongst the greats. I just do not consider it amongst the greats of the greats. It's not in the zero category. It's in 00, right here. Still awesome. Still recommend it. Second thing to note, any number I put on this for my rating system for how much I would pay for it will be less than it actually is. You see, Suikoden 2 was not very popular when it came out and only saw a limited print release, which means they only printed one round of copies for it. They have never reprinted Suikoden 2, never remaked it, never retreaded it, nothing. This means copies of Suikoden 2 are incredibly rare and go for $140 a copy or more, depends on where you're getting them. There's a place around here, a used store for video games and comic books and movies and stuff, that had a copy of Suikoden 2 about a year ago, actually, for $250. I would not pay $250 for Suikoden 2, I'm sorry. But I wanted to get that out in the open because anybody who knows anything about this game will be like, that's all you'd pay? That's not what it's worth. So, moving on. Suikoden 2 is the second game in the Suikoden series. Stop me if I'm going too fast. The Suikoden series has always been well known for having a engaging storyline that has to do with a war. Now, I know, a lot of RPGs have a war as a central theme or central element, but one thing Suikoden does, especially 2, far greater than any other game, or rather any other RPG series like that, is that the war is actually not just the central theme, but it's something you are actually doing. You are driving the war through the course of the game. You know, like FF6, for example. You obviously were major players in the war, but you never actually fought battles in it, with like 2 exceptions. Final Fantasy Tactics, a strategy game, but the war was going on over here while you were either behind the scenes or right next to it, trying to move through the web of deception and trying to figure out exactly what's going on and save the world and your sister. Definitely important. But you get the point. Suikoden, you are fighting the war. Every battle you fight, well, not every, but 90%, 80% of the battles you fight are actually relevant to the conflict that's going on in the resolution. I'm struggling to think if I even should try and summarize the plotline. It's long, it's epic, it's engaging, it's well done, it's well written. I admit that I tend to think of Suikoden 2 as one of my low fantasy games, my down to earth games. And what I mean by that is one of the games where the story has to do with the people and the politics and the economics and the military, you know, things that are a little more down to earth than saving the world from the giant unknowable evil over here on the side. But I can't quite call Suikoden 2 that. In fact, I think one of the reasons the game caught me so much is it's actually a beautiful blend of the two. You see, on the one side, we have the war, the politics, the economics, all of this that's happening, the Highland country and its invasion of the city-states and Muse and the people making deals with each other and giving credence to their political standpoints, to having the money to have the backing in order to properly push their viewpoint onto the other city-states. You know, all of this wonderful interaction and all of this wonderful Machiavellian stuff. I don't even know what to call it. I love it, though. I love it when a game does this stuff, and not very many games have this. But Suikoden 2 also happens to be very high fantasy. The way the runes work, you know what, I'm going to go over that really quick. In Suikoden 2, you have things called runes. Now, all of the runes in the game are it's the equivalent of materia in FF7 if you've played that. You know, you can go to a store and you can buy a fire rune, right? Here's the kicker. The magic system is more close to D&D or Final Fantasy 1. If you ever played that, you know, you have so many level slots per rest state per day, and so you can only cast, say, a level 1 fire spell from a fire rune 4 times in a given day. You know, things like that. Now, admittedly, I don't like that. I never actually liked that system. I didn't like it in D&D. I didn't like it in Final Fantasy 1. But I can live with it. I can go with it. But the runes are readily available. They can do all sorts of fun things, obviously. I'm not going to go into the details of the rune system specifically, but the runes, how they matter to the story, is relevant because runes are all reflections of the 27 true runes. The true runes are sentient things. They have their own restrictions and limitations. It seems to vary based on which rune it is, what they can do, what they can't do. For example, there was a rune, the Sun rune, I believe, in Suikoden 5, which was actually sealed within a mantle, and people had to try and get it out of the mantle actively. Now, it's entirely possible that the rune was actively holding itself within the mantle, but the thought that they could pull it out at all means it's at least somewhat limited. See, I hesitate to call these things deities or something of a similar nature, obviously a higher power, because the true runes are much stronger than anything else walking around the earth, but it's complicated. Let's just summarize it that way. In Suikoden 2, there are three, well, technically four true runes that really play. The main focus of the game, in my opinion, is actually the two beginning runes, the Dark Sword and the Bright Shield rune, which I'll get into in a moment. But you could be forgiven for thinking that the Beast rune is what the game is really about, because the Beast rune, in my opinion, this is never outright stated, is what actually pushed the game to start. It put the events that occur over the course of the game into motion, because Luca Blight had the Beast rune, and the Beast rune had been in the Blight family for some time. And I'll get to him later. But the other two runes, I guess I'll cover the final one. There's a little side quest involving the Neck Lord. It it doesn't sound the same when it's said out loud, because it's Necro Lord. He's a vampire, but Neck Lord. Yeah, he came into contact with the Blue Moon, I believe, rune, something along those lines. The Moon rune, which is basically the rune of vampirism for all intents and purposes. And there's this whole city. He's actually from Suikoden 1. Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2 do occur, one right after the other, and Suikoden 2's events are at least somewhat affected by those of Suikoden 1. But anyways, there's just a whole side quest with him and the Moon rune and the woman it actually goes to. I can't remember her name right now. Sierra, I think. And that's just kind of a side thing. So the Moon rune doesn't really have anything to do with anything. The other two, the two primary runes, though. See, the beginning rune is something that's a little more theoretical. It's the idea that there was this one rune, but then it got split into two by its dichotomized perspectives. The thought of offensive force in order to change, and the thought of defensive force in order to preserve chaos and order. And the dichotomy between chaos and order is the fundamental principle behind basically all of the runes, all the true runes, and that's how they tend to push their agenda, is either with order or with chaos. So towards the beginning of the game, for reasons I don't remember exactly right now, or rather reasons I guess I should say that never really become clear, the Bright Shield rune comes across the main player character. You can name whoever you want. I believe Ryu is the default name, or rather the correct name, and helps empower him in order to become the hero that you do throughout the course of the game. And your best friend, Joey, or Jowie, ends up getting the Black Sword rune, which is the Chaos one I mentioned earlier, and he ends up joining with the Highlanders, and that becomes a mess. I've heard it said, before Pax said it like 20 minutes ago, that Jowie is the Delita of Suikoden 2, and it's absolutely true. The only reason I would say it's different is Jowie, in my opinion, is more... It's easier to say that Jowie is overall a good person, an anti-hero definitely, but still someone who is trying to make the place better, make things better. In fact, his whole scheme, this is a bit of a spoiler, he has this huge involved scheme and tangled web going on that basically becomes off as worse than it is, because he never expected the opposition, being led by the hero, to be nearly as successful as it was. He never expected you, the main character, to actually get anywhere. But you do, and it completely throws everything off.